Hi everyone. I was just finishing some settings. Let me just see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this live stream to try and review the foundations of economics. This is the first unit in the IB Economics New syllabus. In this live stream, I'm going to focus on the two questions that we ask in that first unit. So what is economics in general, and how do economists approach the world? So let's begin. Um, well, basically, the first part of the syllabus talks about economics as a social science. So it's important to remember that economics as a social science, which means it studies societies and individuals in societies, as opposed to, say, the natural sciences that study the natural world. The basis of the study of the basis of the study of economics, there are two main branches of economics. There's microeconomics, which is the study of individual components of the economy, whether you're studying a specific market or the effect of a change in the price of a specific good on another good, for example. Once you're zooming in on different components, on certain components of an economy, you're in the realm of microeconomics. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, is when you zoom out and you look at the whole economy. So topics to do with unemployment, inflation, economic growth. These are all economic topics and studies. I had several videos that I made to introduce the 9 central concepts. What are the 9 central concepts of economics? Well, first of all, economics is the study of scarcity. It's the study of the problem of scarcity. When you look at the needs and wants of people in society, they seem to be but the resources available to satisfy those needs and wants are very limited. So what happens is you have a scarcity of the resources that are available to satisfy the needs and wants, the seemingly unlimited wants and desires of society. Now, because of scarcity, choices have to be made. So economics is also the study of choice. What are the incentives driving a choice, and what are the consequences of that specific choice? Now, choices can be influenced by and can have consequences for these 4 things. Number 1, efficiency. Since resources are scarce, we can't really afford as a society to have waste, right? So we try to maximize our use of scarce resources. Okay, at the same time, economists study equity. Equity is not equality. Equality is about sameness. Equity is about fairness. Whenever there is a certain, distribution of scarce resources or distribution of output, some people will, get more output and make more income than other people. So economists study this inequity in the distribution of the factors of production, as well as inequity in the distribution of income. Okay, so equity is not about equality. It's very different. Equity is about fairness. Economists are also interested in studying economic well-being. The choices that society makes and consumers make and producers are often driven by their desire to improve their economic well-being. Okay, so what does economic well-being mean? How can that be achieved? Can the pursuit of economic well-being come at the expense of other things like efficiency or equity? And you'll see that as we unpack the syllabus. Economists also study sustainability. Sustainability, because resources are scarce, you have to balance between using your resources to meet the needs of today, as well as still being able to meet the needs of tomorrow, right? Let's assume you get your pocket money or your allowance from your parents once a month. If you spend your whole allowance at the beginning of the month, you won't have any allowance left to go out with your friends at the end of the month. What you're doing here is your spending pattern is unsustainable. So how do you balance between the needs of today and the needs of tomorrow? How do you balance between the needs of the current generation and future generations? So it's not just for one person in their lifetime, it's also for across generations as well. Now, choices that we make will create some sort of change. So economists study the causes of that change as well as the consequences of those changes. Okay, so say for example, there's an overconsumption of cigarettes. So the government decided to impose an indirect tax. That will create some sort of change. The intended change is to discourage the production and the consumption of cigarettes, right? Well, what will be the consequences of that change? Well, in the long run, your population will be a little bit healthier. However, tobacco farmers might lose some of their livelihood, right? So economists try to look at the causes and consequences of change due to the choices that are made on the microeconomic and the macroeconomic level. At the same time, the choices that we make rarely affect just us. They also have an effect on the people around us because we live in very interdependent, complex systems. So economists study interdependence, how the choices of one group can affect other groups in society. Last but not least, economists study intervention. When should the government intervene? And when the government decides to intervene, how should it intervene? So this is basically the first part of the syllabus. You just need to understand that economics is a social science. Economics is split into two branches: microeconomics, the study of individual components of an economy; macroeconomics is the study of the whole economy. And to understand that these 9 central concepts are weaved through the rest of the syllabus. All right, so the problem of choice. At the very beginning, we introduced the factors of production. There are 4 factors of production. There's land, which refers to all natural resources. Okay, land refers to, as I said, and I'm going to write notes here, all natural resources. The payment to the owners of land is what economists call rent. Okay, so that's land. Labor refers to the time and effort exerted by the workers. Okay, so it's not the workers themselves, it's their time and effort. And the payment that workers receive, that the owners of labor basically receive, is what we call a wage or wages. Okay, capital refers to all man-made resources that help us produce other goods and services. So right now I'm using my iPad, I'm using my Apple Pencil, I'm using my MacBook, I'm using my Wi-Fi connection. This is all capital that helps me produce this live stream. The owners of capital receive an income, obviously, and economists lump all the income of capital in a word called interest. And of course, entrepreneurship is the risk-taking factor of combining land, labor, and capital to produce a good or service. And the owners of entrepreneurship, or the entrepreneurs or the owners of enterprise, receive what we call profit. So remember, rent, wages, interest, and profit, these are the incomes of the FOPs. Okay, now remember, we talked about the problem of scarcity already. Scarcity is the problem where there seems to be unlimited human needs, okay, and wants, but they are met by limited resources. And because of scarcity, there needs to be a balance between meeting the needs of today or the current generations and meeting the needs of the future generations. So when addressing the problem of scarcity, it's also important to attempt to meet the needs of today while also allowing for sustainability, meaning allowing for future generations or yourself in a future time to be able to meet your needs. Okay, all right. Opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative that you forego when you make a choice. It is the cost of choice. When you choose something, you're inevitably giving up something else. The benefits of that thing that you're giving up is your opportunity cost. And this brings us to the difference between free goods and economic goods. Okay? Just a clarification, free goods are not goods that you get for free. So let's assume you walk into a supermarket and they give you free cheese samples. That's not a free good. In economics, that's not what a free good is. A free good is a good where the production or consumption of which does not entail or involve an opportunity cost, like sunlight. Your consumption of sunlight does not create an opportunity cost, right? That's a free good. The cheese that you got as a sample from a sample stand, the cheese stand at the supermarket, it was given away for free, but nothing really is free. That does entail an opportunity cost for the supermarket. They're just giving it away at a price of 0 to hopefully entice you to buy some of that cheese. So economic goods are goods where the production and consumption of which entails an opportunity cost, but are goods where the production and consumption of which does not involve or entail an opportunity cost. So basically, any economy, in order to address the problem of scarcity, it has to answer 3 basic economic questions. What are those 3 basic economic questions? What and how much to produce? since you can't produce all the things that you need and want, you can't satisfy all the needs and wants of individuals and societies. A society or an economy has to decide, okay, well, what are we going to allocate our resources to the production of? What are we going to produce and how much? Are we going to produce, cars and butter and chicken and this and that? Or are we going to build more schools? Or so the point is, any economy cannot produce everything to meet all of its needs. So it has to decide, well, what are we going to produce and how much? The next question is the production question. How are we going to produce? Most goods and services can be produced using several different production strategies or production methods. So how are these goods and services that the economy is going to produce, how are they going to be produced? Are we going to rely on labor-intensive production methods where we employ lots of workers, or capital-intensive production methods where we employ more capital? The last is for whom to produce. This is the distribution problem. So who gets the goods and services that the economy is producing? Are they going to be distributed based on who has the ability to pay? Well, what about people who are unable to pay? Right? Do we just leave them out to dry? Right? So the distribution problem. So any economy, an economy is a system that attempts to address the problem of scarcity by addressing those questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom. Now, when it comes to answering those basic economic questions, you can either rely on a market system, so basically the interaction of demand and supply. Consumers demand what they are based on their ability to afford this good or service, and producers supply the good or service. And basically that leaves out the people who can't afford to pay. The alternative way of answering any economic question is through government intervention, okay? So, for example, when you look at education as a good or service that is being produced by any economy or society, you see some private schools where basically the good or the service is provided through the market. You have people who can afford to send their kids to private schools, and you have schools who, basically provide private education. Usually it's very expensive and it can't be accessed by everyone. But then you have government intervention. You have the government actually providing public education. So you see in the field of education, you see both a reliance on the market system and government intervention. All goods and services can either be provided through the market or through government intervention or through a mixture of both. So that brings us to the different types of economic systems. An economy that relies mostly or only on free markets to provide everything is what we call a free market economy or a capitalist economy. The extreme opposite is a planned economy, which is an economy that relies only on government intervention. There are no free markets. There is no private ownership. Everything is owned by the government. Everything is provided and distributed by the government. Most economies in reality are neither 100% free market or 100% planned. They're mixed. Most economies are mixed. I mean, even the United States, which people seem to think of as, the beacon of capitalism, a very hyper-capitalist, free market-driven economy, there are still lots of things that are provided by government intervention, okay? So these are all related to, again, the cost of choice, the problem of choice, the problem of scarcity. All right, so this brings us to the production possibilities curve. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I've already created multiple videos and I will link them. You can access the links through the playlists. But basically, when it comes to the PPC, you need to know the assumptions of the model. We assume that the economy can only produce two goods. So here in this example, I have, burgers and cars. These are the only two goods that the economy is producing. Obviously, it's unrealistic, but it's an assumption to simplify the analysis. We also assume that all resources are fully employed and used efficiently, and that gives us the actual curve, the frontier itself. Any point on the curve implies that the resources are fully employed and used efficiently. We also have to make an assumption about whether the opportunity cost is increasing or constant. In this case, I am increasing opportunity cost because obviously the resources you use to produce burgers are very different to the resources you use to produce cars. Resources are not equally suited for the production of everything. So the more resources you take away from producing burgers to producing cars, you give up more and more burgers to be able to produce the same amount of cars, because you're starting to take resources that are actually better suited for producing burgers. And the opposite is true. Let's assume you're here at point B and you're starting to increase the production of burgers. The society is moving more towards point A. What you're doing is you're also taking away resources that are more suited for the production of cars. Okay? Now, a constant opportunity cost curve will be a straight line. This only happens when both goods are basically relatively similar and resources are equally suited to the production of both. Okay, so a humanities teacher can teach history and economics. They take roughly the same level of expertise. A lot of economics teachers teach history. A lot of history teachers can teach economics. So this is a situation where there's more constant opportunity cost rather than increasing opportunity cost. So the model can show the concept of opportunity cost, as you can see, like moving from point A, where the society is producing 50,000 burgers and 10 cars, to point B, okay, where the society is increasing the production of cars from 10 to 30 cars. It sacrificed 15,000 burgers. That's the opportunity cost. Also, the model can show the concepts of scarcity and choice. If there was no scarcity, there would be no curve, right? You can produce an infinite combination of cars and burgers. And obviously, moving from point A to point B is a choice. Society is choosing to increase the production of cars, and the cost of that choice is you have to sacrifice some of the burgers you can produce as a society. The production possibilities curve can also show the concept of unemployment. As you can see, point C here is inside the curve. Any point that is inside the curve implies that some resources are either unemployed or there's inefficiency in the use of resources, which brings us to the concept of efficiency. Point A and point B are different combinations of producing burgers and cars, but they both show full efficiency and full employment. But point C, there's either unemployment or inefficiency. Now, actual growth is when you increase the production with the current resources. So basically, you're making better use of unemployed resources, or you're making better use of your existing resources. So moving from point C to point B represents actual growth. Point D is currently unattainable unless the quantity or quality of the factors of production increases. There's an improvement in the quantity or the quality of the factors of production, or the entire PPC shifts outwards. Because if the quantity or quality of factors of production increases, the whole PPC will shift out. Or if technology improves, the whole PPC will shift out. That's a growth in production possibilities. So remember, actual growth is a movement from one point inside the PPC to a point closer to the PPC. Growth in production possibilities is when the entire PPC shifts outwards. And this will only happen if there's a discovery of natural resources, or there's an increase in labor resources due to immigration. There's basically an increase in the quantity or quality of resources, or an improvement in the state of technology. The second model, and I have, again, separate videos based on this, is the circular flow of income model. The circular flow of income model is this one here. It's basically a model to show the interdependence between economic decision makers. Remember, interdependence is one of the 9 central concepts. When different decision makers make choices and interact in an economy, they don't just affect themselves; they affect others. Okay, so this is so. What are those sectors? Well, it starts with the household sector. The household sector are the owners of the factors of production, and what they do is they sell or rent out their factors of production to the business sector. In return, the business sector pays them an income. So the owners of capital receive interest, the owners of land receive rent, the owners of labor receive a wage, the owners of entrepreneurship, the people who are giving their entrepreneurship skills, receive a profit, right? So the business sector, when they take those FOPs, they use it to produce output of goods and services. And the households use that income that they get from selling or renting out their FOPs to spend on goods and services, expenditure on goods and services. So you can see this is the flow of income between, it's the flow of the resources, output, income, and expenditure between the household sector and the business sector. This is the main part of any sort of capitalist or free market economy. However, households and businesses do not spend all the money they earn. Some of it is saved in the banking sector, and that's called savings. In return, banks take those savings and they loan the money out to people who want to invest. So it comes back to the household and the business sector in the form of investment spending. The government also collects taxes from the household sector and the business sector. But in return, the government injects a lot of money into the economy in the form of government spending or government expenditure. At the same time, we buy a lot of goods from foreign countries. These are called imports. To pay for those imports, we spend money. So import spending, that's money that flows out of our economy to other economies. Foreign countries also buy our exports, the goods and services that we sell to them. So in return, we get money that's called export revenue. So savings, tax, and import spending are the three leakages. Investment spending, government spending, and export revenue are the three injections into the circular flow. I've had separate videos about this, so if you need more clarification about this, just check out the circular flow of income model videos. All right, so this brings us to the second part of the Foundations of Economics unit. How do economists approach the world? So we have to look at the difference between positive economics and normative economics. Positive economics is economics that is factual, that relies on the use of logic, the use of creating hypotheses, models, and theories to explain these hypotheses. The assumption of ceteris paribus. In positive economics, to study the relationship between two variables, you have to assume all other factors or all other variables are held fixed or held constant. So when you look at the demand curve later on when we get to microeconomics, you're going to see that the demand and supply analysis is very heavily based on the assumption of ceteris paribus. Because if you change too many variables at once, you can't really analyze what's happening. The economy is an incredibly complex system. Positive economics relies on empirical evidence, collecting data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative data, but it relies on empirical evidence. And there's room for refutation and disagreement, basically, in a way, refuting arguments and refuting ideas put together by other economists. So basically, they build off on each other. Normative economics, on the other hand, is the realm of opinions and value judgments. Okay, so policymaking is often driven by normative economics. So policymakers try to obviously look at the data and look at the facts, but there's also their own personal opinion and the values and beliefs they bring to the table. So normative economics is also a realm where economists really disagree on which is more important. When should the government pursue more equity, more fairness versus more equality, more sameness, right? So remember, equity is about fairness. Equality is about sameness, right? When is more equity desirable? When is more equality desirable? Some policies will rely more on equity, like say, for example, tax policies, income taxes. People who earn higher incomes tend to pay higher percentages. That can be seen as fair and equitable by some people. Other people might argue that no, we should tax everybody the same percentage. So they say it's better to actually be equal, charge everyone an equal tax rate, right? So again, economists disagree on when to pursue more equity and when to pursue more equality. But the point is, positive economics relies on facts and data. Normative economics relies on opinions and value judgments. And in reality, it's very hard to separate them. Okay, so say, for example, if I say the inflation rate is 4%, this is a positive statement. It is positive economics because this is something that you can measure. This is something that someone else can refute if they, change their way of measuring inflation or whatever. Okay, a normative statement would be something like this: inflation rate's too high. Another economist might argue, actually, this inflation rate is quite healthy, right? So the inflation rate's 4%, that's a fact, right? Whether it's too high or too low, people might disagree. That's normative economics, okay? Now, this part here isn't really, you don't have to know as much detail as you might think. You really just have to be able to talk very briefly about how economic thought has changed over time. So economics as a science, as a separate science, in ancient societies, it was the philosophers that were the early economists. Economics wasn't really a separate science. It was mainly just philosophers talking about value and all of these things. But then the father of economics as a science is really Adam Smith, who lived in the 18th century, in the 1700s. And he advocated for a laissez-faire economic system, basically an economic system that relies on free markets, division of labor, specialization with no government intervention. So he's really the father of economics as a science. He advocated for no government intervention, a free market economy, and basically laissez-faire, just freedom, economic freedom, basically. In the 19th century, people built on the ideas put forward by Adam Smith, and you see the rise of the concept of utility. Utility is the idea that when people make consumption decisions, they're trying to maximize their satisfaction. Their consumption decisions are driven by utility. You eat a bar of chocolate if it gives you some satisfaction. That satisfaction is what an economist would call utility. So when you make a consumption decision, you're trying to maximize your utility. You also see the concept of the margin starting to appear in the 19th century. People starting to realize that, you know, the price of a good doesn't really reflect the total utility that you gain, but rather the marginal utility, the extra utility that you gain from consuming an extra unit. You start to see marginal analysis, you know, marginal product, marginal cost. All of these things that we're going to do in microeconomics start to appear in the 19th century. And then you see the rise of what we call classical macroeconomics, Say's law, which is basically supply creates its own demand. Classical macroeconomics believed that the economy always gravitated towards full employment. And this is why there's no need for government to intervene in the economy, because if there's any unemployment, it will sort itself out. If there's unemployment, wages will fall, businesses will employ more people, and so on. So the point is, classical macroeconomics is that supply creates its own demand. Okay? In the country, you also see Karl Marx critiquing classical economic thought and basically saying that, you know, capitalism as a system is very oppressive, and there really is class warfare. There really is a struggle, a class struggle between what he called the bourgeoisie, you know, the aristocrats and the landowners, versus the proletariat, the working class. And Karl Marx believed that at some point the proletariat are just going to revolt and they're going to eliminate class altogether and live in a classless society. And that's basically what we call communism. Now, there's never been a fully communist society, because a communist society is basically a classless society. And even countries or societies that label themselves as communist haven't really been communist if you go by the definition of communism and how Karl Marx. But basically in the 19th century, Karl Marx started to see the evils of capitalism and started to criticize capitalism. Now, in the 20th century, a big turning point was the Great Depression. The Great Depression proved that supply does not create its own demand. There could be excess supply of all goods and services, and people just being unemployed, not being able to buy this, all these goods and services, right? So that's when you see Keynes starting to say, actually, no, the economy doesn't gravitate towards full employment. The government has to give it a boost by boosting aggregate demand to basically move it towards full employment. So whenever there's a recession or a depression, the economy will not fix itself by itself. The economy will not self-adjust, as classical economists used to believe. The government has to actually boost aggregate demand and help the economy out of recession or depression. This is the basically, you see the rise of macroeconomic policy based on Keynes and his ideas. So we call this the Keynesian revolution. This was in the 1920s and 1930s up until 40s and 50s. That's the Keynesian revolution. However, in the 1970s, you started to see stagflation and big problems with Keynesian economics. So you see the monetarist or new classical counter-revolution. It's a revival of classical ideas with some adjustments. You see that classical counter-revolution in the 1970s, 1980s, and so on, up until the global financial crisis, where again, you see that new classical ideas aren't working, and there seems to be more of a shift back towards Keynesian. So you see, basically what happens is you see this, you know, society is just kind of gravitating between Keynesian macroeconomics versus new classical or monetarist macroeconomics. Now, in the 21st century, which is the century that we are currently living in, you see an increasing dialogue with other disciplines like psychology and the growing role of behavioral economics. You see economists not just making assumptions that people are rational and will always, do what's best for them. That's not really true. If people were rational, why would people choose to smoke, right? Why would people choose to eat junk food? Like, all of these things are why would people choose to speed? They know that this puts them at great risk. The point is, human beings are not rational. We're very emotional. And 70% any of our decisions are only 30% logical or rational and 70% emotional. Okay, so that's why you see the growing role of behavioral economics, which relies more on psychology. And you see an increasing awareness of the interdependencies that exist between the economy, society, and the environment. You can't really separate the economy from society, from the environment, and the need to appreciate the compelling reasons for moving towards a circular economy. We can't just keep using scarce resources to produce goods and services and then producing waste and throwing away that waste. We have to figure out a way where we use the resources to satisfy our needs and wants, and then recycle and reuse in a way where basically that is basically more sustainable, that allows these resources to last and for future generations to benefit from them. So, this is just a live stream to kind of review what is economics and how do economists view the world or approach the world. Please feel free to leave any comments, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support these live streams, I'm going to be doing every couple of weeks, or every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll do a live stream to review part of the syllabus. And obviously, feel free to subscribe, join the channel for exclusive perks. You see the link down below. In the link down below, you'll see it in the video description. You can join the channel. There are exclusive perks for members. And of course, you can always leave a comment, subscribe, like the video, share it, do whatever you want to support the channel. I really appreciate all your support, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next live stream. Have a good one. Bye.